Hello, hi, and welcome to this episode, this very special episode of the Mandy Meyer podcast. As per usual, this is a podcast where we chat all about your health, your fitness, you working on those goals, and most importantly, you achieving those goals. Now, let's go back to where I said welcome to this special episode of the Mandy Meyer podcast. What makes this episode so special? This is episode number 250 of this podcast. And I'm actually going to use my podcast stats to give you or to deliver a very important message for you today when you are working on your goals, no matter what the goal is that you are working on. If you want to achieve something, what you need to do to actually achieve that said something, that said goal. I want to take you back to when I first had the brain fart of starting this podcast. So I had this idea and I'm like, cool, how do I reach more people purely so that I can help more people? And I'm like, if I can start a podcast, I can actually chat in detail about health and fat loss topics. And I just feel that's such an awesome way for people to actually learn. Like, social media is great, but you don't get to all the nuances of absolutely everything. So I'm like, cool, let's make this podcast. And those that are serious about implementing what I say, making changes to their lifestyle, will listen to the podcast. Now, to be very honest with you, it took, I don't even know, but I'm going with several months from me actually having the idea of creating the podcast to actually doing the first episode. There were many reasons for this. I kept delaying it because I think the biggest reason was I was scared to do it, because I know that so many people start podcasts and they never ever proceed past a certain episode. So there was this big fear of failure in my mind, and that was the thing that was stopping me from actually starting. But I kept reminding myself, I'm like, Mandy, your biggest why has always been to help just one person. And I know that sounds so cliche, but anyone who has been following my social media accounts from way back when, I think it was 2016 or 2017, and who has been part of my mailing list from those years as well, will really know that that has always been the biggest goal for me, is just helping one person or as many people as I possibly can. And I knew that the podcast was an excellent way of doing so. So eventually I built up the courage to record the first episode, which was a little brief introduction. And I was so nervous sitting there, and I clicked the upload button, right? I had no fancy equipment, nothing what you see now on this YouTube channel. I had no idea what I was doing, but as my finger was shaking, I was sitting there and I was like, upload, and I uploaded it, and I was like, oh, what now? And I still had that big fear inside of my mind. I'm like, what if this thing fails? And I had to remind myself on a consistent basis that, Mandy, the only way this is going to fail is if you let it fail, if you stop making podcast episodes. And I want to read a little interesting stat for you. And it's actually this stat, like this article that I had read before I started the podcast, that really instilled that bit of fear of failure within my mind. And it reads as follows: 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. Of the remaining 10%, 90% don't make it to episode 20. Okay. Now in this, I'm like, okay, I have to get to episode 20, because that means that I am in the top 1% of all podcasts out there. Just picture that for a moment. I'm like, the only way I can fail is if I stop recording episodes. And I was like, I'm not going to be part of those statistics. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to let that happen. I'm a stubborn mofo. Like, I'm very persistent when it comes to things that I want to be persistent in. And don't worry, I do have a message to this episode, okay? I just wanted to run through some of the stats first, just so that you get a full understanding of how difficult it actually is to, I want to say, not only to succeed within the podcasting sphere, for example, but just to make an episode. requires bloody hard work. It requires the research into what I'm going to chat about or what any podcaster is going to chat about. It requires the editing. It requires the uploading. It requires the monitoring. It requires a lot. And that is probably why a lot of people don't succeed or don't push past episode 3 or episode 10 or episode 20. And another reason why a lot of people don't push past certain episodes is because I'm going to be very honest with you. The listeners, like the listenership of these podcasts right in the beginning is absolutely dismal. I was questioning myself. I'm like, why am I putting so much time and effort and money into something like this? Because it costs a bit of money every single month as well. And I'm like, I'm not even getting listeners. Like, why am I doing this? And I kept reminding myself, I'm like, Mandy, that episode got 10 listeners. Out of those 10 listeners, maybe one person has learned something. And that is the reason why you are doing it. Fast forward almost just over 2.5 years, I actually worked it out since I posted my first episode on the 11th of January 2022. It's 30 months and 3 weeks. Just picture that for a moment. 30 months and 3 weeks where I have consistently put out episodes of this podcast. Not once have I ever skipped an upload day of the podcast. And that, my friends, is how I got to 250 episodes with almost 500,000 downloads. I showed up every single day that was a recording day. I showed up every single day that was an editing day. Every single day that was an upload day that I had scheduled for myself. I showed up for it, no matter how I felt on that day. I did the reps, I put in the work, and that's how I got to the point of having 250 episodes. In the beginning, I wasn't overly concerned. Yes, it was on my mind. Yes, I was questioning it a lot, but I wasn't going to let it be the thing that stopped me from making episodes. I did question, the listenership. And I'm like, is this going to be worth it? And I'm like, if you continue pushing for a year, I gave myself a year, and I'm like, nothing has improved and you don't get any feedback from anyone, then maybe you can rethink it, okay? But I was like, in my mind, I'm like, I'm not even going to let that happen. I'm going to push until, I don't know until what, because I'm still pushing. But the biggest message here is if you want to achieve something, regardless of what you want to achieve, you have to put the work in. You have to show up for yourself. You have to do the reps. Like, you have to put the reps in. It's the same as wanting to build muscle. If that's your goal, you have to put the reps in with the weights that you are lifting, with the strength training that you are doing. If you want to run a marathon, if that is your goal, you have to put the reps in with your long runs. You have to put the reps in with your runs on a weekly basis, right? These goals are not magically just going to appear in your lap. Like, you have to show up for yourself and you have to work on them and you have to put the reps in. Now, again, I know that it's not easy. And I know that life can throw us curveballs, small curveballs, major curveballs. I know, and I know that can get in the way of working on certain goals, but it can only get in the way of you working on certain goals if you let it get in the way. And this is no means me saying, you have to every single day give 100%. Keep in mind, if your best today is 10% and you give 10%, that is you giving 100%. There were a lot of days where I, wasn't feeling up to it and I wasn't feeling great. And I changed the topic of conversations for those podcast episodes to ones that maybe required less time, maybe they required less research, maybe they required, I want to say, less mind work, less thinking, because maybe I wasn't feeling at my best that day. That was slotted in as a recording day. But to still tick a box and to still show up, I tweaked the plan to suit how I was feeling in that moment or what I was navigating in that specific moment or that phase of my life at that stage, right? So again, you want to show up for yourself every single day. You want to put the reps in when you are working for your goals. You have to do it, right? Those goals, like I said, not magically just going to appear. You have to work on them. And I'll go back to that stat about the podcasts and and how only, a certain amount of podcasters make it to episode 10. What I've seen a lot, because remember, I do a lot of market research. I do a lot of research into other podcasts. I follow a lot of people online, and I see that they're now starting to set up podcasts, not necessarily now, but over my period of research, which has been several years. And a lot of the times, right, and this also has a message to it, a lot of the times I see these people, setting up a podcast. They haven't even put out one episode yet, but they're buying the best of the best cameras. They're buying the best of the best microphones. They're buying the best of the best equipment. And, they think it's that the equipment is the thing that is going to help them succeed. And that's the same with anyone, any single person on their health and fat loss expedition. It's like signing up for a gym membership before you even sure that you want to go to the gym, right? Or before you've even created consistency in maybe another habit. It's like buying the best running shoes out there when you haven't even started actively increasing your steps on a daily basis, right? Thinking that the equipment is going to be the thing that helps you be successful. But at the end of the day, it's you, it's your mindset, it's the consistency that you create. It's only now, right, in the last couple of months, I want to say, that I have upgraded to a new microphone, that I have a new camera. And all of this is done not only for the podcast, it's done for a new project that I'm working on for next year. Had it not been for the new project that I was working on for next year, I would probably still be rocking it with my old microphone that I bought at Incredible Connection. Because at the end of the day, it's not the equipment that you have. It's not the gym membership that you have. It's not the running shoes that you have that are going to help you be successful at the goals that you want to achieve or the goals that you are achieving. It's you showing up, doing the reps, putting in the work, no matter what you are going through. And again, like I said, it doesn't always need to be push mode. There can be times where you go into, say, a little bit of a cruise mode. There can be times where you take a little bit of break. I think over December, I intentionally took a break for, I think it was a week, maybe 2 weeks at max, where I didn't post any podcast episodes. Other than that, it's been pretty much get the reps in, Mandy, get the podcast episodes uploaded. And again, I'll go back to stats. I could have very easily stopped recording any episodes of the podcast because maybe I wasn't 100% happy with the listenerships and the downloads and everything else. But I knew that that wasn't the reason that I was doing it. I wasn't doing it to get to 1 million downloads or 500,000 downloads or whatever it is. I was doing it to help one person. And again, that's like you and your health and fat loss expedition, where you're focusing purely on that number on the scale. If you're going to look at that number on the scale the entire time as the only metric of success, I can be very honest with you, it's going to be quite a tedious chore. And I say that because oftentimes it does start feeling like a chore when you're purely looking at that number on the scale, right? So your why, you really need to dig deep and have a look at why you are doing this. Because I can tell you now, right, the same as when I first started and I looked at that, the downloads or the listenership, and I'm like, 10 people, breaking Guinness records here, man. You can go in the Guinness Book of Records for 10 downloads. Obviously, that's me being sarcastic. But, again, in those very moments, I could have been like, well, this is pointless. But like I said in the beginning of this episode, I looked at it and I shifted that mindset. I'm like, well, maybe one of those 10 people learned something from this, right? And again, that's the same with you and that number on the scale is you really need to have a look at other reasons why you are doing it, and not only for the shift in that number on the scale, because when that number on the scale isn't shifting, like I wasn't getting more than 10 listeners, that's where you need to be able to pinpoint something else. You need to be able to pinpoint some other area of progress, some other reason as to why you're doing it, some other reason as to why you're going to celebrate in that moment, right? So again, like I said, this episode is just something special for me, and I absolutely love making podcasts, and honest with you, I didn't even realize that we were so close to episode 250. It was when I was sitting there and I'm like, cool, I'm going to start making some notes, some show notes for the episode. And I had totally a different idea of the topic of conversation for this episode. And I was labeling things. I'm like, wow, the episode 250. I'm like, how did I ever get to this point? Like, I remember, like I said, I just remember that day where I uploaded episode number 1, and I look at it now, I'm like 250 episodes, and I'm actually getting goosebumps as I speak of it now. And, again, I just reminded myself, I'm like, but it's you, Mandy, it's you that put the reps in. And then I also reminded myself that it's you, the listeners, that have played a major role within me also getting to 250 episodes. Every single time I get a message from one of you saying, Mandy, I don't think you know this, but your podcast has really helped me. Or every single time I read a review or I see that there's a new review coming in, I get a huge smile on my face and I just get goosebumps, because I'm like, this is working, this is helping people. And that's the only reason why I ever started this podcast. And you can actually hear I'm getting a little bit emotional as I speak of it now. And again, I always say, I wouldn't be able to do this podcast if it wasn't for you guys that actually listen to this podcast on a very regular basis. So again, from my side, as I always say, just a massive, massive thank you. And I don't throw those words around lightly. I'm not just saying it to make you feel good and listen to the next episode. I'm saying it because I really mean it from the bottom of my heart. So again, any single goal that you are working on, no matter what it is that you are working on, right? You have to be willing to put the work in. You have to work on the reps. You have to show up for yourself. And again, don't confuse that with me. I'm not saying that you always have to be in push mode. The only thing that you always have to remind yourself of is the only time you can fail is if you stop trying. And I think that is the most important thing. Is there were many times that I wanted to stop trying with this podcast, but I didn't allow myself to do that. I didn't allow myself to be in that percentage of people that didn't make it past 20 episodes of the podcast, because I knew that there was a much bigger reason as to why I was doing this than just the amount of episodes or downloads that I was getting. And that's the same with you and your health and fat loss expedition. It's about something so much bigger than that number on the scale. And I will continue speaking about that, because I just want as many people to work on creating healthier lifestyles and know the health benefits that come with creating a healthier lifestyle, the longevity that gets added to your life, and all of that is so much more important than that number on the scale. I'm going to love and leave you like I usually do. Keep smiling, keep laughing, and keep being kind to one another. Much love, your friend that's going to put out even more episodes of this podcast, Mandy.